Good morning and welcome to my study for the introduction to what is our final part of the sermon series on the book of Exodus. Today we're looking at two passages from chapters 32 and 34. Although if you do have time, it would serve you well to read the whole of chapters 32, 33 and 34. Then you would get the bigger picture and the enormity of what is taking place. Now, often when you're listening to a football match, you'll hear the commentator speak of it being a game of two halves. Well, in today's reading, we have two sides of human nature being shown, and also two sides of God's eternal love. But before I talk about that, firstly, a little preamble, introduction as to sort of where we are. The people Israel are at the foot of Mount Sinai, while Moses is at the top meeting with God in receiving instructions about the construction of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, where God will meet with his people and where they will share his presence. But these detailed instructions have taken some time to be given, and so Moses has been away from the camp for a total of 40 days, and the people become restless. They feel abandoned not just by Moses, but by God as well. And so they do something that they're not meant to do, that they've been commanded not to do. They ask Aaron to make an idol. Now, it's very easy for us to be critical of the people Israel, but let us remember that they've travelled some distance in a very hostile environment. They've gone hungry, they've gone thirsty, and okay, they have seen God provide for them. But nevertheless, it is a very difficult place they find themselves in. And now they feel that they have been abandoned, and so it's understandable that they are very unsettled. So they ask Aaron to make an idol for them, which he does. He crafts the golden calf, and there they make merry and revel before it. Meanwhile, of course, Moses is with the eternal God, who has made all things in heaven and on earth, of which humankind is the very pinnacle. He needs no idol to represent him. He is the ever-present Almighty God. Now, really, our passages show that left to our own devices, we will make God in our own image, and we will bring all sorts of things into our lives to replace God. That's really what idolatry is, just replacing God with things. So, however, if we want to know what humanity is truly like, then we have to be in contact with our living God, the Creator, the one who has made us as we are. We know that in due course, Moses becomes a radiant example of humanity, whilst at the same time the people fall victim of their own vices, their own desires, the two sides of human nature, of humanity. And of course, if we want to see the perfect example of humanity, we look to Jesus Christ, who was transfigured, who shone with the glory of God at one time before his disciples. But he shows us what true humanity looks like. But coming back to our story, in seeing how the people so readily disobey God's God's commands, his righteous anger flares. And were it not for Moses' intervention, then a lot more of the Israelites would have lost their lives. But this story and this sort of episode leads many to say that the God of the Old Testament is a God of wrath, whereas the God of the New Testament is a God of love. Well, I want to dispel that. That is totally erroneous and totally wrong. If we read the second of our passages, we will see just how wrong that is. Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. We hear how God passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, Yahweh, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes them. And so it continues. What this highlights is the two sides of God's nature. There is that eternal, long-suffering love. But then there is also God's anger at when he sees things going dreadfully wrong. For those who look to follow him, he will encourage, he will really bring out the fullness of his love in them. But for those who follow the path of evil, then there is punishment that lies ahead. Now, this isn't popular in today's world, in today's church, but it is there throughout the whole of the Bible, the New Testament and the Old Testament. And it's necessary for us to understand this, that human evil, there will be a day of reckoning, and there will be punishment for those who pursue the path of evil. And there's an example, I'll give an example of why this is necessary and why this and how this is shown in my sermon, the text of which can be found on the website or can be sent to you by email. So we have the two sides of human nature, rebellion and faithfulness to God. We have the two sides of God's love, his long-suffering love, but his anger with those who do wrong. I pray that in our time of social isolation, that we will take time to think about these things, that we will look at our own lives to see maybe where idolatry has crept into our lives, where we're being drawn away from God. But I pray that in our build up to Easter, we will draw ever closer to God. So God bless you.